The wind howled through the pines like a wounded animal, dragging with it a wall of cold that cut sharper than any blade. Snow, heavy and wet, fell in slow, silencing sheets, erasing all tracks of what had come before. On the edge of a ragged ridge, where the high country met the wilderness proper, a man swung his axe into the trunk of a thick spruce. The rhythmic thud of steel on wood was the only sound left unclaimed by the storm. Caleb Ward didn't glance at the sky. He didn't need to. He could feel the pressure shift in his bones, in the back of his teeth. A storm was building into something mean. He drove the axe in again and again until the tree gave a long, cracking groan and leaned into its fall. It struck the frozen earth with a dull crash that shook snow from the surrounding limbs. He stewed over it a moment, breathing hard, steam curling from his beard. No triumph. No pause for satisfaction. Just the next task. The cabin stood a quarter-mile downhill, half hidden behind a screen of scrub oak and pine. Caleb's cabin. His hands had shaped every board and nail. His back had borne every stone in the foundation. It wasn't pretty, but it was strong. And most important, it was far. Far from towns and people, far from talk and expectations. He hitched the sled to his mule and loaded the spruce logs, careful to balance them evenly. The mule snorted as the first flake landed on her nose. "Yeah," Caleb muttered, patting her flank. "I feel it too." He turned the sled toward home, trudging beside the mule with the snow deepening around their boots. The trees crowded in as the wind picked up, and he let his mind quiet in the stillness. It wasn't until he reached the bluff above the river that he saw the wreck. The wagon lay half-smashed at the bottom of a shallow ravine, its canvas cover torn and flapping in the wind. The trail that had brought it here was no more than a ghost path, one that hadn't been used in seasons, too narrow and steep to offer safe passage. No sane person would have come this way in winter. Caleb narrowed his eyes and scanned the wreckage. One wheel was missing entirely. The horses were gone, dead or scattered. He set his jaw. He left the mule and the sled behind, climbing down the slope with caution. His boots slid twice on the ice-crusted grass, and he grabbed a rock to steady himself. As he neared the wagon, the stillness shifted, no longer empty, but watching. A small shape stirred under the canvas. Then another. He approached, boots crunching softly. A woman's voice, hoarse and cracked, called out faintly, "Please, don't take them." Caleb froze. Under the broken canvas, a woman huddled with 3 children. Her skin was blue-tinged, her lips split and bleeding from the cold. The youngest, a baby wrapped in thin linens, let out a weak, rasping cry. The other 2, a boy and a girl, couldn't have been more than 10 and 6. The boy had a blooded cloth tied around his head, and his hand clutched a broken piece of wood like a weapon. The girl didn't speak. She only stared, eyes glassy with terror. Caleb knelt and reached out slowly. The boy tried to raise the stick. Caleb caught his wrist, gently, but firm enough to stop him. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, voice low and gravelly. The woman coughed, hard. Her breath rattled. "The baby, please." Caleb reached in and took the child, wrapping it in his coat. The little body was burning and freezing all at once, fever and frostbite fighting for the same ground. He looked at the woman again. She was slipping. "Can you walk?" She tried to rise but collapsed back with a sharp cry. "My leg," wagon rolled. "I think it's broke." Caleb looked at the slope. The snow was thickening. The sky was dark as smoke. He turned to the boy. "Can you carry your sister?" The boy's lips trembled, but he nodded. "Then follow me. We need to move." He didn't wait for thanks. He just started up the hill, baby cradled to his chest. The boy followed, the girl clinging to his side. They reached the mule. Caleb secured the baby in the sled with fires and pointed to the mule's reins. "You walk. She pulls." The boy nodded again. He returned for the woman. She was nearly unconscious, eyes fluttering. He lifted her gently, noting the twisted angle of her leg. Her breath hitched with pain, but she didn't cry out. Back at the cabin, the storm broke. The door slammed behind them as snow swept in with one final gasp. Caleb moved fast. Fire. Blankets. The stove roared to life, heat crawling out into the cold air. He laid the woman on his cot, checked her leg. Bad, but not shattered. The kids sat by the stove, staring at the flames like it might bite them. He heated broth, forced spoonfuls into their mouths. The baby wheezed, coughed, and let out a stronger cry. Good. Crying was good. The woman drifted in and out of sleep. Fevered murmurs. Names. Warnings. Regrets. Caleb didn't speak. He worked. That's what he knew. The boy finally found his voice. Are you the law? No. The boy looked at the girl, then back. Are you gonna send us away? Caleb met his eyes. Storm like this, there's nowhere to send you. The boy nodded slowly, like that answer meant more than Caleb intended. When the wind died, the night grew darker. Silence pressed in again, thick and absolute. Caleb sat by the fire, sharpening his knife. The boy watched him. What's your name? Caleb. I'm Micah. That's Ruth. Baby's Clara. Mama's Eliza. Caleb nodded. Names. Now there were people. That made things harder. Where were you headed? West. Oregon? Maybe. We was trying to find somewhere safer. Caleb grunted. Took the wrong road. Pa died 2 weeks ago. That explained the wagon. A woman alone with children. No wonder she'd risk the ridge. She kept saying keep going, Micah added. She wouldn't stop. Said if we stopped, we'd die. Caleb didn't answer. He just tossed another log on the fire. Days passed. The storm didn't let up, but the worst had broken. Eliza came out of the fever slowly. Her eyes opened fully on the third morning. You saved us, she rasped. I found you. That's more than most would have done. Caleb didn't reply. He handed her water and adjusted her leg. I don't have anything to repay you. Didn't ask. Silence stretched. The children adjusted. Ruth began to hum when she thought no one was listening. Clara's color returned. Micah started feeding the mule and stacking firewood. Caleb found himself watching them. How they filled the space. How their small voices echoed in the cabin where only wind had lived. At night, when they were asleep, he sat outside under the awning and stared at the woods. Snow softened everything, but he knew the danger was still there. He visited the grave behind the shed. A simple wooden cross. No name carved. He remembered her face. The child she never got to meet. I didn't ask for them, he whispered. Don't know what to do with them. But the snow didn't answer. On the fifth morning, he found wolf tracks near the goat pen. One goat missing. Blood on the snow. He followed the tracks into the tree line, rifle slung low. The wolf was big. Starving. When it charged, he shot too late. It slashed his arm before he stabbed it through the ribs. Micah found him limping back, blood seeping from the wound. You're hurt. Wolf's was. Micah helped him inside. Ruth fetched bandages without a word. Eliza held his arm steady while he poured whiskey on the gash. Her hands trembled, but she didn't flinch. After, she looked at him, really looked. Why are you out here alone? Caleb stared into the fire. My wife died 2 winters back. Child with her. Didn't see a reason to stay near people after that. I'm sorry. He nodded once. That night, as the storm finally faded into silence, Eliza sang to Clara in a voice cracked but full of warmth. Caleb lay in his corner, eyes closed, listening to something he hadn't heard in years. Not just sound. Life. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the cold as deeply. He didn't know what would come next. But he knew the ridge had shifted. He was no longer alone. And the storm was only the beginning. The morning broke slow and gray. Light filtered through frost-laced windows as if the sun itself was reluctant to face the cold. Caleb stirred from his cot with a low groan, muscles tight from the wolf wound. He checked the bandage with practiced fingers, noting the swelling had gone down. Still angry, still red, but healing. The cabin was quiet, save for the soft cooing of Clara from the far corner. Eliza sat beside the fire, feeding the baby with slow, measured patience. She was stronger today, color in her cheeks, voice no longer a breathless whisper. The children still slept beneath quilts in the loft, their breathing even and deep. Caleb poured water into the kettle and set it on the stove without a word. Eliza glanced up. You always this talkative in the morning. He looked at her, one brow raised. Only when there's something worth saying. She smiled faintly and went back to rocking Clara. Outside, snow had hardened to a crust. The storm was gone, but the cold remained, deep in the bones of the land. Caleb stepped out with his coat drawn tight, boots crunching as he moved toward the shed. The remaining goat bleated a lonely greeting. He checked the pen, reinforced it, left feed. Tracks led back into the trees. The wolves might return. They always did. When he returned, Micah was chopping kindling out back. The boy's form was clumsy but determined. "You'll break your wrist holding it like that," Caleb muttered, taking the axe from him. He showed him the grip, the stance, the rhythm. Not just brute force, control. Micah listened, eyes sharp, nodding with each correction. "Why are you helping me?" the boy asked suddenly. Caleb paused. "Because if you're going to swing an axe, might as well do it right." Micah nodded again and took the tool back. Inside, Ruth helped her mother prepare what little they had left of the dried beans and cornmeal. Supplies were thinning, but no one said it. It hung unspoken between every meal, every scraped pot, every rationed slice of jerky. Later, as they sat eating around the fire, Eliza spoke up. "We need to go into town soon. There won't be enough to last the winter." Caleb didn't look up. "Town's 3 days out. Road's no good till thaw. We'll run out before that." Silence. Ruth looked down at her bowl. Micah stared at the fire. "I've stretched worse winters," Caleb said finally. "But not with mouths to feed that aren't yours." Her voice was calm, not accusing, just true. "I'll make the trip when I can. Alone." "You won't make it back alone," she replied. "Not with the pass snowed in and the trail full of wolves." He didn't answer, but he heard her. That night, the wind returned, not with snow, but with something more subtle. A restlessness. Caleb sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, staring into the woods. He thought of the man he used to be, before the grave behind the shed, before the silence took hold. Inside, Eliza tucked Ruth into bed. "Do you think he was always like this?" the girl whispered. Her mother shook her head. "No one's born with that much quiet." The next morning, Micah asked to come hunting. "No," Caleb said, strapping his rifle. "I can shoot. I'm not scared." "Not about Faye." "Then what?" Caleb looked at him, long and hard. "Out there, you don't just aim at what you see. You aim at what you don't. Every sound, every shadow might be death. You ready for that?" Micah's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He just watched as Caleb disappeared into the timber. Caleb found D tracks an hour in. He moved slow, keeping the wind at his face. The forest was hushed, cloaked in old snow and new silence. When the shot rang out, clean and sharp, it startled even him. The buck fell where it stood. He gutted it fast and lashed the carcass to his sled. The trail back was longer, heavier, but necessary. Back at the cabin, the children helped skin and salt the meat. Blood stained Micah's hands, but he didn't flinch. "You got it in one shot?" the boy asked. "Would have been cruel not to." That night, Ruth sang softly to Clara, her voice uncertain but warm. Eliza watched them from her cot, face unreadable. Caleb, by the fire, stared into the flames. "You always live like this?" she asked. "Like what?" "No visitors. No neighbors. Just the trees and silence." "I had neighbors once. Didn't help when the fever came." "I'm sorry." He nodded. "And your wife?" "Her name was June. She died giving birth. Baby never took a breath." Eliza closed her eyes for a moment. "I had another daughter, Sarah. She died the first winter after we lost the farm. Fever, too." They sat in silence a while. Different paths, same losses. Later, as snow began to fall again, Micah stood watch with Caleb. The boy held the rifle awkwardly but firmly. "You think the wolves will come back?" he asked. "They always do." "Would you shoot them all?" "If I had to." Micah was quiet for a time. "Sometimes I dream of Pa standing at the plow, sun on his shoulders. I never see his face, just the shape of him." Caleb looked over. "That's enough to remember him by." Micah nodded slowly. "You think I'll forget the sound of him?" "No, not if you don't want to." Eliza watched them from the window. She saw something shifting in Caleb's face, softer edges, less stone. The next day, she stood on her leg for the first time with Caleb's help. "You're healing faster than expected," he said. "Motherhood doesn't wait for bones." He allowed himself a small smile. "I want to help," she added. "I can sew, cook, mend things. Let me earn our stay." "You already have." Still, she mended his torn shirt that night. Cooked stew with dried herbs she'd brought from the wagon. Caleb couldn't say it tasted good, but it tasted like something made with care. That mattered. They began to settle, not into comfort, but into rhythm. Mornings were for chores, firewood, repairs. Afternoons for teaching Ruth her letters, Micah how to track. Evenings brought warmth, even if only the kind that comes from shared breath. But there were shadows still. One morning, Ruth found the front door ajar. Just slightly. Snow blew in around the edges. Caleb stepped outside fast, scanning the tree line. Tracks human. Not old. Not welcome. He followed them to the ridge, but didn't go farther. When he came back, his face was set. "Someone's been near," he said. Micah's eyes widened. "Bandits." "Could be." Eliza held Clara close. "How many?" "Just one set of prints. But that don't mean only one man." He double-checked the rifle. Loaded the revolver. Posted Micah by the rear window. "Why would someone be out here?" the boy asked. "Same reason we are. Looking for something they lost. Or something to take." The next night, Ruth woke screaming. A dream, wolves at the door, fire in the trees. Eliza calmed her, but the fear lingered in her voice the next morning. Caleb built traps around the clearing. Set bells on wire. Recheck the locks. "You think they'll come back?" Eliza asked. "Not if they know someone's watching." She stepped closer. "You're not just protecting your home anymore." He met her eyes. Something there, a flicker of acknowledgement, of duty, maybe something more. That evening, snow began again. Thick, relentless. But the cabin was warm. The fire steady. The walls, once echoing with silence, now held laughter. Quiet, still new, but real. Ruth sat with a rag doll Eliza had sewn from old flannel. Micah played with a carved wooden horse Caleb had whittled. Clara gurgled, reaching for shadows on the wall. Eliza watched it all from the rocker, a smile playing at her lips. Caleb, sharpening his blade, glanced up and saw the shape of what they were becoming. Not guests. Not burdens. A family. He didn't say it aloud. He wouldn't know how. But something inside him began to shift. Not melt, exactly. Just warm. And as the wind rose outside and night wrapped around the cabin, Caleb felt, perhaps for the first time in years, that he wasn't bracing against the cold. He was guarding something worth keeping. And in that small circle of light, surrounded by those who had nowhere else to go, he realized he didn't either. Not anymore. The snow had a different weight now. It didn't just fall. It whispered. It pressed in from the trees, settled thick across the roof, clung to windows like breath held too long. The world outside had gone still, but inside the cabin, the pulse of life beat steadily. Caleb felt it more with each passing day. He'd never meant to care. Yet each morning, when he saw Eliza at the stove or Ruth tying her little braids, or Micah checking the traps like a man twice his age, that old emptiness receded, quietly, but steadily, like a tide pulling out. But peace in the frontier was borrowed time. It began with a crow, black as coal, sitting on the split-rail fence with its head cocked, too still, too curious. Caleb spotted it at dawn. By the time the others rose, it was gone. But the feeling stayed. A presence. That same day, Micah found boot prints by the stream. Just one pair, but fresh. Deep in the snow. Caleb followed them west through the timberline, all the way to the ridge that overlooked the valley basin. He knelt at the edge, the wind biting through his coat. Far below, smoke curled faint from an unseen campfire. Too close. He returned by sundown, face drawn, jaw stiff. "You were gone too long," Eliza said when he came through the door. "I saw a camp down past the bend." She stiffened. "Who?" "I don't know. But they've been watching us." Could it be settlers? Maybe. But if they were friendly, they'd have come already. Ruth looked up from her sewing. Micah leaned forward, grip tightening on his cup. Caleb lowered his voice. We keep the fire low at night. We lock the doors. Nobody goes far, not alone. Micah's knuckles whitened. If they come here, we fight, right? Caleb met his gaze. Only if we have to. Protectin' ain't always shootin' first. That night, no one slept soundly. Wind creaked through the beams. Clara fussed in her sleep. Eliza held her close, eyes wide in the dark. Caleb sat on the porch with his rifle, wrapped in a buffalo hide. His breath plumed like smoke. Somewhere beyond the trees, a twig cracked. He didn't move. A shadow moved between the trees, just once. A flicker. Too tall to be animal. The next morning, he found a dead rabbit strung up on the front gate. Its throat cut, fur stripped. A warning. He said nothing to the others, just buried it in the snow behind the barn. Later, while chopping wood, Caleb heard Ruth humming. A lullaby, soft, almost lost in the wind. The tune wasn't familiar, but the sorrow in it was. Eliza leaned against the doorframe, watching him, arms crossed. You keep this up, you're going to break that axe handle, she said gently. Caleb paused, sweat on his brow despite the cold. Sometimes the work's the only thing that makes sense. She nodded. I know that kind of thinking. He wiped the blade, not meeting her eyes. Man came through these woods years ago. Tried stealing what wasn't his. June, my wife, she tried to reason with him. He shot her before I got to the door. Eliza's expression didn't change, but her hand moved instinctively to her chest. I buried her beneath that oak out back. Swore I wouldn't let another soul cross that line. But we did. You didn't cross it. You survived. She stepped down, her boots crunching in the frost. And you let us in. He said nothing. That night, they didn't light the lantern. The cabin was lit only by the fire's faint orange glow. Caleb stood at the window, scanning the darkness beyond. Why would someone leave a rabbit like that? Micah asked from the shadows. Caleb didn't turn. Because they want us scared. To know they are close. You think it's just one man. Don't matter if it's one or three. If they are that close, they mean harm. What'll we do? Micah whispered. Whatever we must. 2 days passed without incident. But the tension didn't lift. The children stayed close to the hearth. Clara sensed the unease, her cries more frequent. Eliza moved like a woman living beside a loaded gun, measured, alert. On the third morning, the traps were sprung. All of them. Bait gone. No tracks in the snow. Caleb frowned, crouching near the last snare. They are smart. Smarter than most men. Eliza watched him. You think they'll try the door? He looked at her. No. They'll wait. Try to draw us out. Make us desperate. And then they'll come. That evening, Micah asked Caleb to teach him to shoot. Not just a rifle. Proper grip, reloading, sighting. The boy's hand shook, but his eyes held steady. You're not your father, Caleb said as they trained behind the cabin. But that don't mean you can't protect what matters. Micah nodded once. I won't let them take her. Or Ruth. Or Mama. Caleb didn't respond, but something passed between them. Respect. Unspoken understanding. As the sun dropped, painting the sky in blood and ash, Caleb saw movement near the ridge again. Just a flicker. Enough to stir the hair on his neck. He raised his spyglass. 3 figures. 2 standing. 1 crouched, scanning the cabin with a long barrel rifle. They are set in positions, he muttered, backing away. He closed the shutters, locked the doors. They'll come by morning. Maybe sooner. Eliza's face paled. What do? We prepare. They blocked the windows with furniture, set extra wood to the fire, filled buckets with water in case of flame. Ruth packed Clara in blankets and nestled her in a drawer beside the hearth, shielded by iron pots and thick quilts. Micah took post near the rear door, rifle in hand. Eliza armed herself with a carving knife and Caleb's old pistol, her hands sure, though her breath trembled. In the dead silence before dawn, Caleb felt it, that weight again, like standing before the edge of something he couldn't see. He whispered to Eliza, if it goes bad, you take the children through the back, and head for the creek. Follow the tree line east. Don't stop. I'm not leaving you behind. You might have to. No, I won't. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw a strength in her that had nothing to do with weapons. She would fight. She already had. Every single day since her husband died. Every step through the wilderness with her children in tow. She had nothing left to prove. I'm glad you knocked on my door, he said quietly. Her lip quivered, but she held her ground. I didn't knock. You opened it. Just before sunrise, the first shot rang out, splintering wood as it struck the porch beam. Caleb ducked, rolled to the side window, returned fire. One shadow dropped. Micah flinched at the sound, but held his position. Another shot tore through the side wall. Caleb moved like water, silent, sure. He fired twice more. A scream echoed through the trees. But one man got close. Too close. He burst through the back, knife drawn, face wrapped in a bandana. Eliza met him halfway, slashing with a blade. He staggered, howled. Micah fired. The shot went wide, but it made the man stumble. Caleb finished him with the butt of his rifle, fast and brutal. Blood soaked the floor. Outside, the last attacker fled into the woods. Caleb fired once, but missed. Then, silence. The whole world stood still again. Clara wailed from her drawer. Ruth hugged her knees, trembling but unhurt. Micah leaned against the wall, pale as snow, his breath ragged. Eliza stood with blood on her sleeve, eyes glassy. Caleb took a breath. It was over. He stepped out into the morning light, rifle in hand. The snow was marred with footprints and blood trails, but none moved. The ridge was empty now. When he returned inside, he found Eliza kneeling by the fire, arms wrapped around both children. Micah sank to the floor, exhaling like he hadn't breathed in an hour. Caleb sat on the step, head bowed. He hadn't wanted this. Not again. But they were safe. He looked up. Eliza was watching him. You saved us, she whispered. No. We saved each other. She came closer and sat beside him. For the first time, their shoulders touched. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, soft and slow. Inside, no one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Just the crackle of the fire and the knowledge that something had changed. Not just survival. Not just shelter. They had fought for something more. And in the quiet aftermath, Caleb felt a presence, not of danger, but of belonging. Not just a man watching over others. A man who no longer stood alone. The snow began to melt faster than expected that spring. Rivers swelled with thaw, and mud sloshed in the wagon ruts. Trees wept in the morning sun. Winter had retreated, but not without leaving its scars. Caleb stood beneath the old oak where June rested. He'd shoveled the snow clear days ago, laid fresh pine boughs and woven wildflowers that Ruth and Eliza brought from the edge of the creek. He didn't say much. He never did. But the silence he shared with the wind was reverent. Behind him, the cabin stood taller somehow. Not in size, but in soul. A month had passed since the attack. Wounds had scabbed, the blood had been scrubbed from the floorboards, and the door was replaced with a stronger one Micah had helped plane himself. The boy had taken to working alongside Caleb like a shadow. Not for approval, he didn't need it. He was becoming something else. Someone steadier. Ruth, too, was different. Her eyes no longer darted like a deer's at every creak of the woods. She still drew in the dust of the hearth, sketched flowers and birds and sometimes people. One afternoon, Caleb found a drawing of the cabin with 4 figures on the porch. He recognized Eliza instantly by the braid, Micah by his slouch. Ruth had drawn herself taller, and beside them, a figure with a broad brim hat and a rifle leaning on his knee. She never said who it was. She didn't need to. Inside, Eliza had brought life to the place like spring to dead earth. She taught Ruth to bake from memory, even if the flour ran short. She sang old Appalachian lullabies to Clara each night, her voice a low hum that worked deeper than words. And sometimes, when she thought no one watched, she stood by the window with her eyes closed, letting the sun warm her face. The fire inside her had changed shape. And Caleb? He no longer lingered outside the circle of light. He had made peace with the ghosts, if not completely, then enough to let the living matter more than the dead. When he sat at the table now, it wasn't as a host, but as one of them. Still, peace never lingered long on the frontier. The first sign came with the rider, a gray horse, foaming at the mouth. The man leaned heavy in the saddle, blood staining his sleeve. Caleb caught him before he fell, laid him on the ground just beyond the fence. The man coughed once, his face pale as death. "Town," he rasped. "Gone." "Who did this?" Caleb asked, already pressing a cloth to the wound. "Fire," the man whispered. "They came at night, burned every house, took the women, the children." He tried to sit up, then stilled, his eyes blank and glassy. Micah stood behind him, jaw tight. That was Amos. He traded in Bitterroot. Eliza stepped onto the porch, Clara in her arms. "Bitterroot's 40 miles south." Caleb nodded grimly. "They are moving north." "Toward us," she said, voice tightening. "They don't just want land," Caleb muttered. "They want fear." That night, no one slept. By morning, the horizon burned. A low haze of smoke clung to the sky, blown on the wind from south of the ridge. Black ash floated like dying snowflakes. Caleb squinted into it from the lookout hill. He saw them, 10, maybe 12 riders. Armed, brutal, moving slow like they owned the world. Scouting, measuring. Eliza stood beside him, rifle slung across her back. "They'll be here by sundown." He nodded. "We won't run. They'll expect us to." Then we surprised them. Back at the cabin, preparations began. Not just survival, resistance. Micah and Caleb reinforced the root cellar door, turning it into a makeshift safe room. Ruth and Eliza soaked blankets in the stream and nailed them inside the walls to slow the burn if fire came. Caleb dug shallow trenches, filled them with glass shards and broken nails, every deterrent he'd learned from a lifetime on the fringe. They didn't have numbers. They didn't have firepower. But they had heart. And more than that, they had each other. By the time twilight smeared the hills red, the air was thick with smoke. Clara wailed once and Eliza soothed her, singing low and steady. Ruth knelt near the front step, sketching quick lines in the dirt with her finger, a bird in flight, then a flame. Caleb watched her for a beat, then turned back to the rifle. "They are here," Micah called from the ridge. The riders came like ghosts, silent, confident. Shadows made of leather and rage. They halted just outside the clearing, surveying the cabin. A man in a tattered coat stepped forward, tall, one eye clouded white, a cruel scar twisting his lip. He raised a torch. "You've got one chance," he shouted. "Step aside, and we leave you bray a thin dut." Eliza stepped onto the porch beside Caleb, rifle raised. "You come near my children, you'll leave in a box, if there's anything left to bury." The man laughed, deep and hollow. "We ain't looking for a fight, miss. But we're damn good at finishing one." Caleb fired. The torch dropped from the man's hand as he staggered back, shoulder torn open. Chaos erupted. Gunfire split the night. The first wave charged. One man hit a trench and went down screaming. Another made it to the porch. Micah shot him clean through the gut. Inside, Eliza fired from the window, calm and brutal. "Keep low." Caleb barked. "Use your ears, not just your eyes." 2 more riders circled to the back. Ruth yelled. Caleb spun and fired, dropping one as Eliza lunged with the knife for the other. He swung his rifle up, ready to help, but she didn't need it. Eliza moved like water and fire, fast, sure, every strike precise. When the dust settled, 4 bodies lay around the cabin. But the leader wasn't among them. The smoke thickened. That's when Caleb saw it. The barn, lit up like dawn, flames licking high into the sky. The remaining riders had set fire to the north side, cutting off escape. "Cellar!" Caleb shouted. "Now!" They rushed to the rear, Clara bundled tight, Ruth and Micah sliding down the ladder first. Eliza followed, but Caleb paused. He saw the last rider near the tree line, limping but alive. And he saw the torch in the man's hand, aimed not at the barn, but at the cabin itself. "Go," Caleb growled. "I'll hold him." "You'll die." Eliza cried. "Not today." He ran. The last confrontation was not clean. It was blood and fists and grit. Caleb tackled the man into the snow, rifle clattering away. They rolled near the edge of the fire, smoke stinging their eyes. The man slashed with a knife, cutting Caleb's side. He grunted, punched, grappled. Years of solitude gave his muscles endurance the other lacked. Finally, Caleb drove the man's head into the frozen earth. Silence. Smoke curled around him like fog from a grave. He staggered to his feet, vision swimming. The side of the cabin burned now, flames creeping up. He ran, dived into the root cellar just as the main beam cracked above. Darkness swallowed them all. The next hours blurred. The heat above. The coughs. Clara crying. Then, rain. A storm broke like a miracle. When they climbed out the next morning, the cabin was half-charred but standing. The barn gone. The fences ash. But the oak still stood. Caleb sat heavily on the step, breath ragged. Eliza knelt beside him, touched his face. "You saved us." He looked at her, his shirt stained with blood, his hands raw. "We saved each other." Micah stood behind them, rifle still in hand, taller than he'd ever looked. Ruth picked up a stick and drew again, this time a sun rising behind a cabin. No flames. Just light. Days passed. Neighbors came from the valley to help rebuild. Word of the fire spread fast. A place that stood its ground. A man who wouldn't abandon his own. They rebuilt together. Stronger walls. Higher fences. A second room for the children. By the time summer came, green bloomed where the barn once stood. A new garden. A swing hung from the oak. Clara toddled barefoot through wildflowers, giggling. Caleb carved a new sign for the gate. It read simply, "Home." Eliza leaned into him one evening, as the sky turned to fire without the smoke. "You still waiting for the world to take everything back?" He shook his head. "Not anymore." Micah ran by, wooden sword in hand, chasing Ruth. Clara squealed behind them. And Caleb smiled, quiet, but whole.